it's interesting they use the language black and or African American. I don't know. This is one of those things where, and I'm going to, Kat, forgive me, I'm going to attribute this to the radical left, this identity politics of the radical left, that you have to define groups and people are in certain groups. And the reality is if African American is something different from black, that's an argument that Elon is African American.
The remedies are as obnoxious as I've ever seen. And all of the causes of actions, including they don't have the right employment records.
This line, which Kat and I both don't like, at the start of paragraph 3, it says, Tesla's Fremont factory is the only non-union major American automotive plant in the country. So, Kat, what's your reaction to why is this in the paragraph number 3 and what's the purpose of that statement?
There's absolutely no purpose to it whatsoever, other than they intend to put that point in there that has absolutely nothing to do with this lawsuit. The DFVH is, tasked with enforcing certain laws in California, but all the labor laws fall under the purview of the National Labor Relations Board and are covered by a federal law, the National Labor Relations Act. Not only does this lawsuit have nothing to do with unions, the entity that's suing Tesla has absolutely nothing to do with unions. It's basically, is the way I see it, in paragraph 3 up front, it's just riding on the coattails of, whatever salacious news issues, and it sounds very smearish to me.
The story, the complaint is about whether there's racism or other bias issues in the Tesla factory. That has nothing to do with being a union factory, whether there's a union involved or not. And then the second thing to me is, it's not really true. It's true that General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, aka Dodge, Chrysler, whatever, they have union factories. There are plenty of non-union automotive factories in the United States run by foreign manufacturers like BMW and Honda and Subaru and so on, and Toyota. I think by and large, all the foreign automakers that have factories in the United States are non-union. It's sort of like, why is this relevant to anything? And why don't, and I suspect that Toyota actually makes more cars in the United States than Tesla. And Honda probably makes more cars in the United States than Tesla in non-union factories. I don't know for sure. Does that sound right to you, Kat?
I'm not exactly sure about that, but it seems to me that would be the case. Again, it has no relevance to this lawsuit whatsoever, nor to the entity that's calling itself the plaintiff. Intentionally, the whole way through, they sort of stacked this so that they could get the maximum amount of time, and including waiting till the laws with additional time are passed, so that will be a separate issue to be litigated. I don't trust their motives here or what they're doing, and it all seems very, everything we've been saying, salacious and smearish and unprofessional in a sense. I don't think they gave them enough notice. I mean, how could they possibly have given them enough notice if Tesla doesn't really even understand what's happening? Okay. They have lawyers, so they should know what's going on.
Now, this is something, Kat and I talked about this before. I want to be a little bit lighthearted about this, but the CEO of Tesla was born in Africa and is now an American. So there's an interesting question about how you define what it means to be an African American. Because Elon Musk was born in Africa and lives in America. So I think we can all agree he's not black. But there are light-skinned black people. What is it? You can really get into an interesting conversation about what does it mean to be African American. Technically on the language, African American, Elon Musk is an African American. He was born in Africa, he became an American. It's interesting they use the language black and or African American. I don't know. This is one of those things where, and I'm going to, Kat, forgive me, I'm going to attribute this to the radical left, this identity politics of the radical left, that you have to define groups and people are in certain groups. And the reality is, if African American is something different from black, that's an argument that Elon is African American. So I'm really curious about what they mean, why they chose that language. They're so politically correct that they had to phrase it as black and African. I don't know if you wanted to address this, Kat, because I'm not afraid to go edgy and talk about topics like that. Do you have any thoughts on whether Elon Musk is an African American, for example?
Well, I think he is an African American, but I don't know if they thought that through. And I don't know if they would have felt comfortable leaving that term out. So phrase out.
There's this reference here to African American workers make up 0% of executives and 3% of professionals. And I think you said there were employees at Tesla who were at a high level who were African American, Black, whatever. Can you describe that a little bit?
There are at least two on, like, Tesla's has a page dedicated to all the things they're doing for diversity and inclusion that came out in 2020. And there is, I think they're vice presidents, director level or above. One is, I think, the VP of payroll, and she's African American. There's a picture of her. And then she's been there since 2018, I believe. And the other one was the head of HR, and then now is like a VP of people. So there are two people that I just, on a quick look, that are during this time period and currently. Now maybe they don't work at the Fremont plant.
Right, that's what I was going to say. At the Fremont plant, they might be at Palo Alto headquarters, which, for people who aren't familiar with Fremont and Palo Alto, they're like across a bridge.
Yeah,
they're on opposite sides of what's that bridge called? The Dumbarton Bridge. They're really close to each other. There's a bridge separating them across the bay, across the San Francisco Bay. It's interesting that they selected at the Fremont plant language to distinguish this, as opposed to the company. So I guess Elon technically isn't an executive at the Fremont plant. He's an African-American CEO. But here's what's striking to me. They're saying they are ignorant of the true names or capacities of the defendants sued under the fictitious names Doe's 1 through 50. And my attitude is, well, if you have complaints from workers, wouldn't the complaints identify the people who did the things that you're saying they did? Why would you be ignorant? You might say, we're not choosing to name these people at this time, but to say you actually don't, to say you're ignorant of their true names or capacities means, are these complaints that you're relying on totally, what, do you have any reliable data? If you don't know the names of anyone, any single person who supposedly did something wrong, then what complaints do you have from workers if they don't name one manager, they don't name one supervisor, if they don't name one employee who did something wrong? Either this is a lie. I would say it's more likely it's carelessness. And this is another detail, by the way. There's no date for this incident. Did this incident occur in 2015? Did it occur in 2020? And again, you have this complaint and you don't have the name of, by the way, notice this is one time they say the white manager. So does that mean all the other incidents that they were complaining about were not white managers?
That's a good point.
Right? Why is this specific incident reference a white manager? Does that mean all the other incidents involved Mexicans or Indian Americans or Asians? Or why this one? And how do they not know this white manager's name? Right? We're ignorant of the names of the John Doe defendants. Why don't you know this? This is a very specific detail here. Why don't you know this manager's name? There's this other reference here in paragraph 4, talking about Elon. Mr. Musk is infamous for taking positions that run counter to those of other car companies, technology companies, billionaires, and workers. Completely, why are they making this personal to Elon Musk? Elon Musk has been celebrated as a visionary with relentless pursuit of green energy, space travel, and self-driving cars. First of all, Elon Musk is not named in the complaint. He's not one of the defendants. So why bring this up? It's like, let's just bring up details that are salacious for no reason. Tesla markets its vehicles to the environmentally conscious, socially responsible consumer. No, Tesla markets its vehicles to people who like good cars.
I think it's pretty well known that people love working at Tesla. It's a little bit sketchy that they have this, they're bringing a public or right of action on behalf of the public, but they have no data no real facts or people, or it's very ambiguous all the way through.
It's striking to me that there's so little numerical substance. How many people actually complained? How many, hundreds of complaints, that could be 200. How many people complained? Was it 7? Was it 50? Was it 100? We don't know the answer to that question. How many people complained since 2019? How many of the complaints were before 2019? what is the window in terms of the statute of limitations? So, and you're talking about, and then there's no context for how this compares to a comparable factory, right? So if you took a big GM factory in Detroit, how many complaints do they get of racial mistreatment? And how do you compare that in context? And I really think actually one of these, another thing that stood out to me was that there's this one moment where they mention a white manager.
Mhm.
And I'm going to say, if in any of these other stories you could have said white manager, you would have.
Right.
So therefore, every single other story did not involve a white manager.
Yes. There's a lot of that.
I mean, if I'm going to read it with a critical eye, and I want to go back to that one big lie, the big lie that you're ignorant of the names of the John Doe defendants. And I don't think there's a whole lot in here where they allege John Doe number 1 did X. It's really striking that you named the Doe defendants in the caption and you described them in the parties, and then nowhere in the substance of the lawsuit did you say John Doe number 1, Jane Doe number 2 did X. Well, why bother putting the John Doe defendants in the lawsuit in the first place if you're not going to allege a specific John Doe did this specific act? That's the purpose, by the way, just to be from a lawyer's perspective. That's the purpose of having John Doe defendants, is that you say, we don't know who this person is, but this is what they did. And you would identify them as John, because they said in the caption, they say Joe's number 1 to 50, right? So you would say John Doe number 1 did this, Jane Doe number 2 did that. So do you notice that? I mean, does that stand out to you as something odd?
Yeah, I mean, and then they said they're ignorant of them, right? And so how can you know that one manager's white and know what? How can you know that anybody did anything and you don't even know who did what? None of this really looks good or makes sense, but it definitely looks bad for Tesla if you just read it quickly and you don't know anything about how lawsuits work and basically they can say whatever they want in the complaint and then amend it. I think it's very suspicious that they didn't name anybody. They're not mentioning specifically, a manager. They should have these names. They should know. And also, I still go back to that one guy who said he heard, certain, phrases, offensive phrases 50 to 100 times a day. Does that count as 50 to 100 complaints?
Probably not, but I like it.